Have you ever wondered how ancient people traded goods across thousands of kilometers without modern roads, engines, or transportation systems? Long before highways existed, merchants traveled through deserts, mountains, and valleys, searching for safer routes between distant communities and markets. These journeys were difficult and slow, yet repeated travel gradually connected settlements separated by enormous distances across the heart of Asia. At first, travelers simply followed places where water, food, shelter, and natural pathways made long journeys possible and relatively safer. Rivers became especially important because they provided reliable water, while also guiding travelers through otherwise difficult and unfamiliar landscapes. Over generations, repeated journeys created recognizable paths connecting river valleys, mountain passes, desert edges, and growing settlements across Central Asia. These paths were not one continuous road, but a collection of routes that could change whenever geography, danger, or opportunity demanded. As more travelers used them, certain locations became important stopping points where caravans could rest, replace supplies, and exchange valuable goods. Oases were especially valuable in deserts because they offered water, food, shade, and opportunities for merchants to meet other travelers. Gradually, these stopping places became busy centers where people from distant regions could exchange products, information, languages, skills, and stories. One of the most important advantages came from traveling together, because large caravans could share guides, protection, animals, and supplies. Camels became essential companions because they could carry heavy loads across dry landscapes while surviving longer periods with limited water. A caravan might carry food, water, clothing, tools, and trade goods needed for journeys lasting weeks or even months. But carrying everything was impossible, so merchants depended on settlements along the route to obtain fresh supplies during their journeys. This created a powerful connection between settlements, because each community could provide something useful to travelers passing through. A village might provide food, while another settlement offered animals, tools, shelter, or access to valuable local products. Merchants soon discovered that distant regions possessed goods unavailable in their own lands, creating strong reasons to continue traveling. In ancient China, one particularly valuable product would eventually become closely associated with these long-distance trading routes: silk. Silk was lightweight, beautiful, valuable, and relatively easy to transport, making it highly attractive to merchants traveling across enormous distances. Chinese merchants carefully prepared silk bundles before sending them toward Western markets through increasingly familiar routes across Central Asia. However, silk was only one part of a much larger exchange involving spices, metals, textiles, animals, food, and precious objects. Every region possessed different resources, giving merchants strong reasons to travel farther and exchange products unavailable within their own communities. The more valuable these exchanges became, the more frequently merchants returned to the same routes, markets, settlements, and trading centers. Repeated journeys gradually transformed simple paths into recognizable corridors, connecting distant regions through the deserts and mountains of Central Asia. Yet traveling across Central Asia was never simple, because enormous deserts separated many important settlements, water sources, and trading centers. Caravans crossing these deserts had to carefully calculate distances between wells, rivers, and oases before beginning each dangerous journey. Running out of water could threaten an entire caravan, including its merchants, animals, supplies, and valuable cargo. For this reason, experienced guides were extremely valuable because they knew where travelers could find water and temporary shelter. They also understood which desert passages were safer and which dangerous areas should be avoided during particular seasons. Beyond the deserts, travelers faced another enormous challenge: crossing mountain systems surrounding Central Asia and reaching distant valleys beyond them. Mountain passes could be narrow, steep, freezing, and dangerous, especially when sudden storms appeared without warning during difficult crossings. Yet these passes provided natural gateways between different regions that would otherwise have been extremely difficult for travelers to reach. The mountains of Central Asia therefore became important crossroads where travelers from China, Central Asia, and Western regions could meet. Among these regions, areas surrounding the Pamir Mountains became important crossroads for travelers moving between major territories across Central Asia. After surviving the mountains, caravans could descend toward valleys and settlements where fresh supplies and new trading opportunities awaited. Here, merchants often exchanged part of their cargo instead of carrying every product all the way toward distant destinations. This system allowed different merchants to specialize in particular sections of the enormous journey across deserts, mountains, and unfamiliar territories. One merchant might travel from China into Central Asia, while another continued westward with the goods he had received. As a result, goods could travel thousands of kilometers without one individual needing to complete the entire journey personally. This chain of exchanges became one of the most important mechanisms connecting distant markets across ancient Asia. But the Silk Road carried far more than silk, because every region contributed different products to the growing network of trade. Spices, precious metals, textiles, ceramics, livestock, food, and crafted objects could all travel between distant communities along interconnected routes across the continent widely. Some products were traded because they were rare, while others became valuable because distant regions could not produce them in sufficient quantities. This constant exchange encouraged merchants to search for safer routes, better markets, and reliable places where caravans could rest during journeys. Over time, certain settlements became wealthy because caravans repeatedly stopped there to trade, rest, repair equipment, and resupply their groups. Markets in these settlements became meeting points where merchants from completely different cultures encountered one another during their long journeys nearby. They exchanged not only goods, but also information about distant lands, prices, routes, weather, and dangerous conditions waiting ahead along the journey. A merchant arriving from the east could tell others what conditions were like along the route he had just traveled before them recently. That information could help another caravan prepare better before beginning the same difficult journey in the opposite direction across unfamiliar and dangerous territory. Knowledge therefore became another valuable resource moving along the same routes as silk, spices, metals, and other traded goods throughout ancient Asia there. Travelers also carried stories about unfamiliar people, customs, technologies, foods, clothing, and distant civilizations encountered along their long journeys across ancient Asia. Repeated contact slowly made distant societies more aware of one another, even when enormous geographical distances still separated them from each other completely. The network also changed whenever political borders shifted, wars erupted, or dangerous routes became impossible for merchants to use safely suddenly. When one route became dangerous, merchants could redirect caravans through another valley, settlement, mountain pass, or oasis along safer ground. This ability to adapt helped the trading network survive changing political conditions, harsh climates, conflicts, and dangers for centuries across Central Asia and beyond. The Silk Road was therefore never a single permanent road, despite the name later given to this enormous historical trading network throughout. It was actually a constantly changing system of routes connecting China, Central Asia, Persia, and regions farther west historically. Some journeys followed rivers, others crossed deserts, while others carefully climbed mountain passes before descending toward distant cities and markets along the way. Every successful journey made certain routes more familiar and increased confidence among merchants considering the same dangerous journey at a later time again. Generation after generation, travelers passed their knowledge of water sources, routes, markets, dangers, and resting places to those who followed behind. Eventually, these repeated journeys connected communities that had previously known very little about one another across the enormous Asian continent. A product beginning its journey in China could eventually appear in a market thousands of kilometers away in western lands far beyond Asia. By then, that product had passed through the hands of numerous merchants, guides, animals, and communities along the route between distant regions across Asia. The journey itself had become a chain of human cooperation stretching across deserts, mountains, rivers, settlements, and ancient cities throughout Asia. What began as practical paths between water sources eventually developed into an enormous network of economic and cultural connections across many regions over time. Its strength came from thousands of ordinary journeys, rather than one grand road constructed by a single powerful civilization or ruler alone. Merchants, guides, farmers, craftsmen, animal handlers, and local communities all played important roles in keeping this enormous network alive for many generations. Together, their repeated movements gradually connected distant civilizations through trade, information, culture, technology, and human relationships across the ancient world. The Silk Road was created slowly, shaped by countless travelers who kept moving despite enormous distances, harsh landscapes, and constant danger ahead across Asia. Across deserts, mountains, rivers, and cities, their journeys transformed scattered paths into a vast network connecting civilizations throughout the ancient world for centuries.